The wait is over, we have made it, and now we must talk about every single detail that I noticed inside of Deadpool and Wolverine. Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to the grid. Spoiler warning for those who need it, and let's ride. We open with, as per usual, the Marvel marquee, which includes Deadpool now from Deadpool 2, which comes after the shield flies directly in his face, which is quite possibly a very subtle way of telling us what's coming. Then we have Captain Marvel to the left, which looks to be either from the Marvel's movie or from the first time that Carol actually flew with the Skrulls. You can also now see the full group of the Marvels inside of the A, where we get a glimpse of Kamala standing side by side Monica and Carol, which also includes Giant Man, which has actually happened inside of the MCU a few times, the first being inside of Avengers Civil War and the most recent being inside of Quantumania, at least the most recent before now. Then as we zoom all the way out and the logo turns red, notice the texture of the background, because if you look closely you'll notice that it's the texture of Deadpool's actual suit, which is now being blended with the title logo. And we also get Deadpool inside of the M, though this one looks like it's a fourth wall break inside of Deadpool 1. Then in the first moments of the movie, Deadpool says what everyone is probably already thinking: the Marvel music does always get you pumped every single time, and we were not really sure if we'd ever see Deadpool on screen again, especially with Disney. And he says the first thing that I disagree with here in this movie, that he definitely should have his own franchise. We then roll up to the gravesite of Logan, which is set exactly the same way that Laura left it at the end of Logan. And we're reminded that the events of Logan happened in North Dakota. And this is the downtown of North Dakota? I'm from Chicago, so yeah. What? Anyway, Deadpool goes on and on about Wolverine not being dead because that's not how regeneration works. Obviously true. But as he continues to dig, he hits metal. At least that's the sound that we, the audience, hear, which actually should have been a dead-on clue that we actually hit the skeleton of Logan and not his casket, because we know that the children actually buried him inside of the end of Logan, but they did not put him, or at least we didn't see them put him inside of a box of any kind. And once that's made really clear to Wade, he loses it. Because this Logan is very much deceased. Now, while all of this is happening and Deadpool is fanpooling over the legendary Wolverine or legendary Logan skeleton that he is now sitting next to, in the background you can hear Only You by the Platters, which obviously is a song, but it was also a movie in the 90s starring RDJ, who was recently revealed as Dr. Doom for Doomsday, Avengers Doomsday specifically, and Marissa Tomei, who we all know as Aunt May. And we know that RDJ as Tony Stark had a thing for Aunt May inside of the MCU. But the placement of this song here directly says to me that this is directed to Hugh Jackman and that he is the Wolverine in terms of the fans' eyes and how we see everything inside of the Marvel Universe. And officially, it will only be him unless we go with, you know, Henry Cavill. Then enter the TVA, who look to have been chasing Wade for quite some time through the multiverse, to the fact that the TVA agent actually says his full government name in front of everybody. And if you've grown up the way I have, if you hear your full government name, you know that you're in trouble and you need to figure out a situation quickly, because he says his full name of Wade Winston Wilson. Winston? But that does mean that his initials are WWW. So I mean, and the character was around the beginning of the internet. Sorry. But Wade then takes out the log that was lodged in the skeleton of Logan, which obviously has a smell to it because it's been decomposing inside of his rotting body for a long time, at least about 6 years. Also remember, that's how Logan died. But as the TVA agent gives his full spiel, Deadpool says death by day player, which is a clever line because in film, a day player is someone who is not on a long-term contract and is usually around for just a day. And death by said player is said to be a script writing faux pas because usually this character isn't big to the driving of the story, but they show up a lot and they don't need to. So the way that this is shot and edited brilliantly, I might add, is perfect for the way that this character actually works out because it fades in and out of the actor's voice as we turn the camera away and towards them, which actually is what an audience would do with this type of character, which basically means that they would turn their attention on and off. We then are taken on a history lesson by Wade Wilson about the human skeleton and specifically Logan's adamantium human skeleton. And the line where Deadpool says, "I'm not going to give you my weapons, but I promise not to use them," is a dope line as well because now we as the audience know what he is going to use. But of course we get some good old maximum effort to the song of Bye 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 by NSYNC. Which, by the way, the spelling of NSYNC is the last letter of every single one of their names, specifically the first names. Also, notice that as this montage goes on, many of the heads that rolled from Deadpool are completely covered, which makes it easier for inside of the visual effects situation where a lot of the things that actually happen on screen probably actually came to life. And while all of this is going on, this dude is literally making a music video at the same time. But this did bring me back to those MTV world premiere behind the scenes music video shoots that we used to see in the early 2000s, where they used to give us the world premiere. But this also then led me down a rabbit hole to find out if Ryan Reynolds was actually in the suit to do this dancing number, and I found out that it is not. It is actually the stunt double by the name of Nick Polly, and it's only right that we end this off with Then, after the very one-sided fight in Deadpool's favor, we are brought to our title shot, which brings us to a flashback montage that includes Cable's time watch, Peter doing the X-Force sign, Deadpool standing on a amusement park sign talking to Peter, then Wolverine's claws appearing during the battle between Weapon 11 and Logan inside of X-Men Origins Wolverine. We also get a glimpse of when Deadpool offs Ryan for the Green Lantern script, and Vanessa dying and being brought back after Wade successfully hits the gunman with the cheese spreader, which then brings us to March 14th, but it doesn't give us a specific year. So then, here lies my first fan theory. Did Wade set things up to where Vanessa doesn't die anymore? But this version of Vanessa has somehow now been told that she would be shot if XYZ events actually happen. So instead of staying home, he decides to go and try and join the Avengers, which then interrupts the break-in event and then keeps Vanessa alive. And while trying to join the Avengers, Deadpool meets Happy Hogan with what looks like the earlier version of Iron Patriot's helmet in the background. And as Wade is explaining himself in terms of the Hulk hand situation, we get a short glimpse at the shield that was used as a stabilization tool inside of Iron Man 2.
Perfectly level. I'm busy. What do you want?
But this is practically a prototype for the Shield, at least inside of the MCU. And here we also hear a line that we've heard from the trailers as well.
I know I'm turning everything into a joke, but I care, and I want to use that feeling for something important.
But he finishes it here with, "I need to let my girl know that I matter," which further adds fuel to my fan theory here. Wade has turned time around so much that Vanessa no longer dies. But after some time, she's also not at the moment with him because of what he may have told her based on what he knows about time now. Because later on at his birthday party, she does mention not being shot when she's with the new person that she's seeing now. We also get the chance to see a Mach 1 helmet in the background of Wade as he pleads his case to Happy. And to the right of that helmet may be the same glasses that Tony used after demoing the Jericho missile in Iron Man 1. But then Wade mentions that he wants to talk to the big guy because obviously that's Tony, and Tony has been the benefactor for the Avengers since they began. And we get another look at the incredibly addicting spinning gray thing, which was first seen when Tony is trying to plead his case to Pepper. Then Happy asks about Wade's time with the team after gloating about his own rise in the ranks with the Avengers, to which Wade replies with, "I was Special Forces," which possibly is a nod to X-Men Origins Wolverine. And he also says that he was team lead and founder of the X-Force, which was seen in Deadpool 2. But sadly, all of them perished, which then leads Wade to plead his case to find a place on the Avengers team, which then leads Happy to say that Avengers are needed. They don't need the actual spot. So that's the difference in being an Avenger and wanting to be an Avenger. But we also get a glimpse of the original arc reactor from Iron Man 1, which is what Pepper turned into a gift for Tony after replacing it with the new one, which then leads us across the room to all of Tony's memorabilia, which also includes a picture of Tony and Spider-Man, or aka Peter Parker, when Peter interned for Stark Industries in Spider-Man Homecoming. Then as Happy stands and walks Wade out, also telling him to shoot for the middle,
Find your place.
behind them you can see what looks like a model ship which would have been built in Iron Man 1. Then 3 awards given to Tony. Then on the second shelf, at first glance, this looks like a smaller replica of the Iron Man mask. But if you take a closer glance, it's actually a smaller version of Ultron. Then on the bottom shelf, you can see a case version of the Iron Man suit, which was seen in Iron Man 2. And as Wade gets the door shut in his face on being an Avenger, we can see the original Stark Expo poster in the background, which was also featured in Iron Man 2. We move now to Earth 10005 after 6 long or short years. And by the way, this is the first official moment that we've now established that Wade is inside of Earth 10005, which is the multiverse portion of the Foxverse. And at this point, Wade is now working as a car salesman because he was turned down by the Avengers and is no longer trying to be a superhero, which it's actually worth noting that this man put actual staples in his head where usually you would use glue to establish a secure toupee on your head. And you know that MPV line that Wade says to the potential customer inside of the car during the test drive? That's actually from the Kia website. And of course, Wade can't sell anything without being rude because he's Deadpool. Come on now. Peter then mentions that Wade is living inside of a midlife crisis, which now is even more apparent after being turned down from the Avengers. But this is also the first time that Wade is actually aware of the TVA surveilling him in the subway, because that has actually happened a few times. We learn later on once he gets inside of the TVA with Paradox. And as Wade steps into his apartment, notice that he lives in Unit 17, which in the Deadpool Volume 3 number 17 comic, Deadpool and Blind Owl are kind of into it, which is similar to what happens or has the same friction feel inside of the scenes that we see them in this movie. Then we get all of the familiar faces from Wade's world that we've been so accustomed to seeing before, including the taxi driver, obviously like I mentioned earlier, Blind Owl, then Vanessa, who is standing in the doorway capturing the moment on her phone. Colossus makes his way inside of the MCU as well by way of this birthday party, and Negasonic Teenage Warhead, including Yukio. Then we have the awkward moment between Wade and Vanessa, which for me reminded me of the moment that was had in Multiverse of Madness between Doctor Strange and Christine, when at Christine's wedding she actually encounters Strange and has a bit of a heart-to-heart with him. Though at this point Wade still kind of has a shot because she's not married, or at least not getting married at the moment. And when she mentions the fact that the doorman hasn't gotten her shot, that obviously stung. But like I've been saying throughout the entire time of this video so far, Wade has done so much time travel at this point from what we've seen in Deadpool 2 to now. His time traveling, according to the way that the TVA looks at it, has now changed a lot of things, and him mentioning that he shares a one-bedroom apartment with Blind Owl is very comic accurate, but also very sad. But now keep in mind that we are here for a birthday party, and that is very huge considering the fact that Wade is only around because of the fact that he volunteered himself for Weapon X. So hearing the happy birthday song takes a whole new perspective for Wade, and that's probably why he's fighting so feverishly for his world. Then the TVA show up, taking Wade away from his party and introducing him to Paradox, which I don't know about y'all, but as soon as Paradox started talking, all I heard was Mr. Anderson. And this is also the first time we've seen the timeline since Loki decided to sacrifice himself to keep the timelines intact. And here we show the sacred timeline along with all the other branches from the sacred timeline, including a new concept called decaying branches inside of the multiverse. Then the second funniest portion of the movie for me, at least in the beginning portion, is when Wade actually breaks the fourth wall again and breaks the actual camera for Fox, giving a big fluff you to Fox and actually saying that he's going to Disney World. Then we get a great shot of the woman who is charting in the background, who, by the way, seems to be charting the branches that come off of the sacred timeline. And what it seems like she's charting for is the amount of distance away from the sacred timeline to see basically how far this actually has gone and if the TVA may have to intervene. And this is done with what looks like a combination of a protractor and a ruler. Then Wade gets his newly tailored suit from the very handsy tailor. When he first opens the door, notice that because of the way that this is shot, it actually resembles the katanas in the background, or at least on his back, before he actually dons the suit. Then as we get a close-up on the guy that is fumbling over the Deadpool costume that he is now looking at, we can see inside of his cubicle what looks like a loom monitor, a printer, and the mug that we saw at the gravesite of Logan in the beginning of the movie. You know, the one before the big dance number. But notice that the TVA has since upgraded since B-15 actually took over, because now they look to be measuring the speed at which branches grow, hence the fact that the lady earlier is also tracking that information by hand, and it looks like they are using statistics to figure out how fast and maybe even how quickly things grow and or decay inside of the multiverse, given the fact that they are using things like rhombuses here. The TVA has now categorized the entirety of the multiverse in what looks like quadrants and sectors, which is what we see at the top left corner of the close-up monitor. Then to the right, the TVA logo, and to the right of the logo, the TVA motto, for all time, always, which was first said to Ravonna by Kang, or He Who Remains, inside of Loki season 2. We then find out that there are things known as anchor beings inside of universes, which is a new concept as well inside of the MCU. And Logan is designated the anchor being for Earth 10005. And another incoming fan theory here, does that mean that the sacred timeline, assuming that that would be Earth 616, doesn't need an anchor being because it is going to be kept alive regardless? Or is it possible that Earth 616, assuming that it is the sacred timeline, would actually have multiple anchor beings associated with it, so that in the case of things like Iron Man being taken away from Earth 616, we then change into Doctor Strange being the main anchor being for that particular Earth. Then as Paradox takes out his TemPad and changes or opens the Logan footage,
roll that beautiful bean footage,
we can see that Miss Minutes will somehow make a return at some point because she is still loaded inside of their systems. Paradox reveals that the decay of that actual universe does actually take thousands of years, but is going to be sped up by his hand due to the fact that he is going to use a time ripper. And we get a mention of Old Yeller here, which, if you don't know, that is also mentioned inside of the Cosby Show inside of season 1, episode 10. And as Wade contemplates mattering more or breaking the nose of Paradox, he chooses violence and then shifts his way outside of the TVA through a time door, which then brings us back to the dance number. And then when Wade tells one of the soldiers to keep his country's name out of their mouth, it is a clear throwback to an Oscar event with an A-list Academy Award winner. Then the montage search for our anchor being Logan begins, starting with Short King Wolverine, who is actually more comic accurate than you might have thought. It's because in the comics, Logan is actually 5'3", contrary to the popular belief because of what Hugh Jackman actually portrays on screen, that he is actually larger than he normally would actually be. Then we get Weapon X Wolverine, Patch after that, Old Man Logan, and then Crucified Wolverine as well. Then we get John Bryn's brown and tan suit Wolverine, who is actually also fighting the Hulk. And because the legends are true, we now get the Calvarine. All of those Wolverines are not the one that he is going to take back with him, so he continues his search. And as he does, notice as he leaves through the Crucified Wolverine's world and there's rain coming down on the actual world itself, you can actually see the rain hit the time door, which means that the time doors inside of the MCU actually take up physical space and can be impacted by actual physical matter that we can see by the rain hitting the time door here. And then we find our Wolvie, and we now understand that this version of Wolverine has been ousted by everyone because of events that happened long ago, which we get more into later on, specifically when we find out that he actually became really angry after not following through on something that he should have been around for from the beginning, which then led to the death of everyone. And when Deadpool actually decides to pick a fight with this particular Wolverine, the song played in the background is This Is It by Huey Lewis and the News. Because, and this is very fitting here because the lyrics here say, if this is it, please let me know, which suggests to me that this is Deadpool's last ditch effort to actually find a anchor being for Logan and bring him back to the TVA to hopefully save his own world. But as they stand off, the pistol that Wade pulls on Wolverine is the same one that he used in Deadpool 1. And as Wade returns back to the TVA with now super drunk Wolverine, who has now downed what looks like a full bottle of whiskey, we can hear him say, "On your left," from the time door, which is actually a callback to Endgame and also to Captain America, the Winter Soldier.
On your left.
But this victory is short-lived because he actually brought home the worst version of Wolverine inside of the entirety of the multiverse, which is ironic when you actually think about it, because it's also the only version that we've become accustomed to because it's the only one that we've ever had. Wade then also officially introduces Wolverine to the MCU, also telling him that he's joining at a bit of a low point, which that joke was actually shown to Kevin Feige, and he rolled hysterically when he actually saw it. And it was actually one of the jokes that Ryan Reynolds was really hesitant about showing to Feige. But it turns out that he loved it and it made the cut. Then they head to the void. And as they drop into the void, Wolverine and Wade come to fisticuffs. Wolverine stabs Wade, Wade then shoots Wolverine, and then Wade gets smacked in the face with the rubble of the 20th Century Fox logo, which by the way means that someone was tasked with the job of actually pruning that particular entire logo and scene. And if you know anything about that logo, that is a huge monument that has to be moved. Depending on who was actually doing it, it's slightly an emotional fest as well. But as we pan around the area, we can see a pirate ship, which may be a callback to the actual movie that was produced by 20th Century Fox that was actually called A Pirate Ship. Or it could be a joke pointing or poking fun at the fact that a lot of the early 2000s movies, specifically the 20th Century Fox movies, were pirated and bootlegged all over the place. Or this could just be a slight jab to the Pirates of the Caribbean as well. But we also then see the CN Tower, which is a landmark inside of Toronto, Canada. And as we know, both Wolverine and Deadpool are Canadian. But what makes this a even funnier joke is where it's actually placed, because it's actually placed directly next to the fallen fox sign, which means that nobody actually cares for this anymore, because we know that the void is where things go, where no one cares for them anymore. So the joke here is that at one point, the CN Tower was the largest building on the planet, but that is now no longer the case anymore, and nobody's checking for it. And we also got the Death Star. But in the midst of this, we also get a callback to the fact that Wolverine can push out bullets from his entire body, literally everywhere, including inside of himself through his mouth. And he's done this before inside of the Wolverine, Days of Future Past, and also X-Men Origins, the Wolverine. Then we get more fisticuff moments for Deadpool and Wolverine, which is where Wade pulls out his ace card and says that he can help Wolverine turn around whatever happened inside of his world. But we know that that's a educated guess. But in this regard, this actually runs fairly parallel with the fact that inside of the Foxverse, Logan really desperately wanted to rewind time and find a way to save Jean without actually having to kill her in terms of battling with the Phoenix. And then we also get the reveal of Chris Evans as Johnny Storm, who also does a superhero landing, which is a running joke inside of the MCU, which mostly stems from Yelena Belova. And this also gives us a very unsuspected flame on.
Sorry, what now?
Or at least it's unsuspected by Deadpool, because we as the audience kind of got a hint of what was coming here. But Johnny's flame on is quickly flamed out when he goes up against Pyro, who is a goon for Cassandra Nova, who is actually running everything inside of the Void. But inside of this convoy, we can also see the Fantastic Car from the Fantastic Four. Then as Wolverine prepares to fight Sabretooth, notice that as Deadpool takes the knives, including baby knife, you can then see the Anarch symbol formed on his back. And then Wolverine makes quick work of his cinematic brother. And I say cinematic because it is not comic accurate in terms of Sabretooth being his actual brother, which in fact, in the comics, Chris Claremont wanted that particular character in terms of Sabretooth to actually be his father. But to the right of Wolverine, as he crouches, you can see a ice cream truck, which is the exact same ice cream truck that we've seen inside of Moon Knight during the chase scene inside of episode 1. We then move through a different portion of the Void than we've seen before, which showcases a group of pyramids. And if the Fantastic Four have been here for a while, that might mean that a variant of Ramatut and or Insabanur actually passed through or are still inside of the Void. But then we reach the Giant Man compound, and we are then given a few cameos from some familiar mutants that we've seen inside of the Foxverse before, like Azazel, who first appears in X-Men First Class, then Juggernaut, who appears in multiple X-Men films, but more specifically for me is Deadpool 2. We also see Lady Deathstrike, which I've talked about in shorts on this channel a bunch of different times, but she appears inside of the Foxverse inside of X2. Then after Deadpool gets Johnny Storm killed, he then threatens the entirety of Cassandra Nova's goons with an a cappella, non-warmed up version of The Music Man from Wolverine, aka Hugh Jackman, which, by the way, at a press event, Ryan Reynolds has actually said that Hugh Jackman comes to his home or has come to his home before and performed most, if not all, of the music numbers for Music Man for his children in front of them in his actual living room. But later he then insults Cassandra when she says that her Charles has never stepped foot inside of the Void, but she has seen others, which is why she has the chair. But he calls her a Gen Zer and says that either she should stuff it and make it a actual accomplishment or cancer like the rest of them. And he's actually talking about himself because if it weren't for his mutations, he actually would have cancer as well. From there, we then find out more backstory on Cassandra Nova, and we find out that she was actually the twin of Charles Xavier. When she was born, even before she could walk, she was sent to the Void by the TVA, which is slightly similar to Sylvie's arc as well, because she was also sent through the TVA as a child, but now basically jumps through the entirety of the multiverse after being captured, though she was actually sent to the TVA much older than Cassandra Nova. So it stands to reason that it's looked at that she was going to be a huge factor if she was actually able to be let loose in an actual world. And it also stands to reason that maybe she might actually be an anchor being inside of the particular world that she came from as well. And the world that she came from may even be decayed or decaying now. But when she starts tap dancing through the mind of Wade, she brings him back to the day of March 14th, which we again do not know the year of. But this is after or around the time that he was rejected by Happy Hogan and the Avengers, which, by the way, at this point, being rejected by the Avengers may not have actually been a bad thing, because the Avengers are kind of up in the air right now anyway. But something that I noticed in this flashback is that Wade and Vanessa are in a completely different kitchen, so that possibly means that they may have moved after knowing that Vanessa does get shot and trying to move and change things around, Wade decides to change apartments after also being rejected by the Avengers. But then Cassandra comes out of his mind and Elias shows up. Rent comes due and Deadpool and Wolverine are on the docket, so they then sputter off on a broken leg of a Sentinel, sticking the landing with both of them on top of each other, literally like Looney Tunes. Then, as Logan and Wade talk through a plan, Dogpool shows up. But we also see the gold-plated Desert Eagles that Nicepool actually has, which Deadpool asks if he can have them, and Nicepool says over his dead body, which is where the fitting line where Wolverine says later on that he did what he does in terms of getting Nicepool shot on purpose, not understanding that he doesn't have a regenerative factor. But it feels like he kind of knew that, because Nicepool feels like a completely offshoot from every other Deadpool that we know. Then as Nicepool lends Wolverine and Deadpool his car, we can then see as they drive across sand the fallen Q-ship of the Black Order, which then leads us into a heated discussion and Spider-Man thwips.
Stop it.
After Deadpool spills the beans about maybe being able to change what happened inside of Wolverine's world. And inside of this heated discussion, Wolverine says that Wade didn't get picked up by the Avengers or the X-Men, and the X-Men will literally take anybody, which is true because Xavier has a soft spot for literally any mutant that he comes across. But for the record, Colossus did stick his neck out inside of Deadpool 1 for Deadpool to actually potentially join the X-Men. But then this little heated discussion then leads us into one of the funniest fight choreographs that I've ever seen in terms of what we've seen so far on the MCU or inside of the MCU, and specifically for an R-rated movie in the MCU. And yes, it was everything we needed, including action and all of the small quips that we are used to seeing between the two of them inside of the comics. And remember, I mentioned earlier on the channel that inside of a comic run, a more recent comic run is very similar to the way that they talk to each other on screen here, in specifically Deadpool and Wolverine World War III. Deadpool and Wolverine are then taken back to a hideout, the same hideout that Johnny was talking about earlier, poor Johnny, which reveals some very familiar faces that we've seen inside of the 20th Century Fox verse before, including Jennifer Gardner as Elektra, who Deadpool actually mistakes for Wonder Woman in the beginning, Wesley Snipes as Blade, and there's a joke between the two of them where Blade actually says to Deadpool that he does not like him after jabbing at the fact that he was in retirement. But that is actually not the case, because in real life, they actually really like each other. And then Channing Tatum as Gambit, which was a dream of his, and actually Tatum publicly thanked Ryan Reynolds for allowing him to play this out. And we also include Daphne Keene's Laura, aka X-23. Now, the music when they walk in on these scenes is absolutely flawless. I mean, the score for this film is ridiculous. Thank you to the entirety of the music department for what you have done for the creation of the feels for this movie. Because I say again, the score is amazing. But we find out that all of them have been dropped inside of the void at one point or another as part of the 20th Century Fox universe. And more than likely, their portion of the universe, given the fact that they started really early in terms of when actually the 20th Century Fox verse started, specifically Blade in general, it probably decayed a long time ago. But when Wade asks how they actually got there, Remy's answer of maybe I was just born here is very fitting here, because this version of Gambit has never been seen before, at least again as Channing Tatum. But we have seen a different version of Gambit inside of X-Men Origins Wolverine. But then as Wolverine and Deadpool mention that they have been inside of Cassandra's lair and made it out, we realize that the Borderlands group actually doesn't really believe that and calls their bluff. But in the midst of that, Gambit actually says that there were more people a part of this particular resistance team, which of course included Daredevil. But
Daredevil, I'm so sorry.
It's fine.
Okay.
she doesn't really care at all, and particularly this is a nod to Ben Affleck's Daredevil. Then after an incredible pep talk from Deadpool, which Wolverine is not necessarily sold on because the plan that is hatched seems to have sent him into a slight depression and sends him to a campfire later on, which is where we see Laura, aka again X-23, show up next to him and actually decide to tell him who he actually is, which in particularly means that that suit that he is wearing means he is way more important than he believes that he actually is. Because due to the fact that Logan sacrifices himself, all of those children that he saved now have a chance to grow up. And then as we roll up to the fight, not only do we get a perfect one-liner from Wesley Snipes about him being the only blade available and there only being one blade, which is a slight jab at the crew that is trying to get it together and can't get right in terms of getting another version of Blade on screen. But after we get out of the car and we get our face-off shot, we get a bunch of glimpses at some more mutants inside of Cassandra's arsenal, including the Russian, Psylocke, Azazel, and another close-up of Lady Deathstrike. And we also get another nod to the 98 Blade movie when Wesley Snipes says,
Still trying to ice skate up here.
Always trying to ice skate uphill.
but then Cassandra gets into Wolverine's head after literally finger walking all over his mind. And we find out that it wasn't just the fact that he saw the X-Men at the end of his bar trip when he came back to the mansion. It was what he did after what he saw that actually made him a complete null and void inside of his world, because what that did to him was then make him a killing machine and literally wanting to kill humans everywhere. But inside of this entire scenario, it leads Cassandra to be jammed up by Juggernaut's helmet because Laura actually was able to detach it from his head after killing him. But we find out that this actually works against the thing that they're trying to do in terms of getting back to Deadpool's world, because Cassandra can't do anything if she doesn't have her powers. But we also find out that she does have access to Strange's powers because she has a sorcerer's ring that is available inside of her, literally inside of her pocket. So possibly she could have actually sent them home even with the helmet being on. Then Wolverine has a change of heart in terms of killing Cassandra point blank like this because he remembers Charles and knows that he would not condone what is going on right now. But notice as he does and the actual helmet comes off of her head, you can see radio frequency or radio waves actually coming from the helmet, which particularly are used to stop or gate her actual mind in terms of sending out waves to control or manipulate other people in terms of their actual situations as well. But as a way to thank them for sparing her life, she gives them a 4-second portal opening for the ability to jump away from a coming Goliath to take them out, which then crash lands them onto a CarMax site, and Wade knows his cars so well that when he actually crash lands on one, he knows that it's actually a Kia. Now Cassandra now understands that there's such thing as a Time Ripper, which is given to her by Pyro. She now comes looking for it and comes into contact with paradox, which the sudden influx of power from the Time Ripper gives a red flag to B-15, which is the first time that we've seen her since we've seen her inside of Loki season 2. But then as we scene change from Paradox actually turning on the Time Ripper, from Deadpool and Wolverine being thrown into an actual store, we then see that store was actually Liefield's just feet, which is a slight jab to the way that the creator of Deadpool draws feet. And then that leads us into an in-game portal type reference, or portal type entrance, I should say, of the Deadpool corpse, which includes Blake Lively, which is Ryan Reynolds' wife, as Lady Deadpool, Ryan and Blake's kids as Kidpool and Babypool, Nathan Fillion as Headpool, Matthew McConaughey as Cowboy Pool, and there's even a Super Sentai version of Deadpool too. Nice. And by the way, if you don't know what Super Sentai is, it's Power Rangers, okay? But as Deadpool tries to plead with the group, he mentions that the multiverse thing just is not working. It just keeps having miss after miss after miss. And again, that was another joke that was run across Feige that was possibly seen to be a little bit on the edgier side, but Feige loved every bit of it. But this does give us our very first look at Hugh Jackman wearing the Wolverine cowl, which, by the way, is amazing. And in the semi-continuous shot that we get through the entirety of the Deadpool corpse, we also see a taxi cab, which is another nod to the taxi cab driver from Deadpool 1 and 2. And we also see a storefront for a clairvoyant psychic, which may be a nod to Strange, Wanda, or the current Sorcerer Supreme, Wong. And we also get our Stan Lee sighting here on the side of the bus, which obviously, thank you, Stan, we miss you. But then Peter, who is the anchor being for every Deadpool, it seems, rides in and saves the day, allowing Wolverine and Deadpool to slip out the back door. And then we're giving another glimpse of the Time Rip, which has been built on the NYC Green Line, which actually runs between Church Avenue in Kingston, Brooklyn, and in Court Square in Long Island, Queens. But this is also slightly fictional because this is set in front of the same mall that Dr. Emmett Brown showed Marty McFly the new DeLorean time machine, as denoted by the Lone Pine Mall sign that we see directly under the Green Line. Then Deadpool and Wolverine corner Paradox and reveal the location of the Time Reaper, which to me also revealed that the entirety of the TVA is built on Linux. And I'm saying that because of how they distribute their file system, because on the close-up shot, you can see a little bit down on the right-hand side, a SYS/, and that means that / basically means that this is a Linux machine, because Windows machines end with a backslash instead of a / And Paradox actually describes how the Time Ripper fully works, because it basically has a negative side and a positive side, similar to the way that a battery would work as well. Because the negative side, antimatter, and the positive side, matter, would be what you see inside of the actual Ripper. The red side would be antimatter, the right side would be matter, and when they are ripped between each other, literally time is ripped apart, leading us to Deadpool's hero moment, which also leads us to a heated discussion between Wolverine and Deadpool on who will actually be the hero in this moment, which is sort of the thing that we've seen inside of the comics as well, or it's happened inside of the comics as well, inside of Deadpool Volume 3, Number 1. But Wolverine does not let his newfound buddy go out like that and decides to break down the door and also sacrifice himself as well. And when he does and extends his claws, it's a callback to something that he's done inside of multiple different X-Men movies across the entirety of the Foxverse. But as this goes on, we see a similar time-slipping reality forming around Cassandra, similar to what we saw with Loki. So is this possible that if she would have been able to carry this out, that she would have been able to physically go back to the point where Charles and her were in the womb and take him out, completely wiping out everything that would possibly have happened with mutants that we know, which then leads us into a very dope hero shot of both Wolverine and Deadpool as they do a similar callback to Guardians of the Galaxy, where the Guardians join hands and actually use an Infinity Stone to defeat Ronan. This then leads us to B-15 seeing Peter for the first time, wanting to take him home, and we then get Wade back inside of his own universe with Logan and X-23 at his dinner table, along with all of the other people that he loves and cherishes in his life. So will we see more of Deadpool across the entirety of the MCU? I would venture to say absolutely, because I think that this movie is going to be a huge jumping off point for a lot of the things that we do going forward inside of the MCU. But if you want to go down a little bit more of the memory lane to figure out where we've come from inside of the MCU so far, take a look at this playlist over here. And if you want to go down the memory lane of all of the X-Men, specifically the X-Men 97 version, go ahead and hit this playlist over here. And until next time, y'all be smooth, blurred out.